There are things that happen inside a prison that never make it into any report. Not because people are hiding them, not always, but because the language for certain things doesn't exist inside an official document. You can write down what a person did, you can write down what you saw, but there is no box on any form in any correctional facility in this country for what a place feels like at 3 in the morning when something is wrong in a way you cannot name. I worked at Harwick Correctional Institute for 15 years. I was good at my job. I was promoted twice. I had a record that any officer in that facility would have been proud of. And on a Thursday night in February, in the 15th year of my career, something happened in cell block D that I have spent 4 years trying to understand. I have not understood it. What I have done is quit, move away, stop sleeping without the light on, and eventually decide that some things are better spoken out loud than carried alone. My name is Marcus Cole, and this is what happened. Let me tell you what Harwick was before I tell you what happened there. Harwick Correctional was a medium security state prison, about 900 inmates across 4 cell blocks, A, B, C, and D, built in the early 1960s on the edge of a town that had been built around it, the way some towns are. The kind of place where the prison is the largest employer, and everyone has either worked there or has a family member who has. By the time I started, the facility was aging badly. The plumbing was loud, the lighting in certain wings flickered without warning, and the walls held a cold that no amount of heating seemed to fully reach. Cell Block D was the oldest wing, built in the original 1962 construction, never substantially renovated. The cells were slightly smaller than the other blocks. The corridor was narrower. The lighting was the worst in the facility, a chronic electrical issue that administration had been promising to fix for years. At night, walking D block felt different from walking any other part of that building. Quieter somehow, even when it wasn't. Heavier. Every officer who worked D block long enough developed a version of the same feeling about it. Nobody talked about it directly. We talked around it, jokes about the wiring, complaints about the cold, observations about how the inmates on D block tended to be quieter at night than inmates anywhere else in the facility. Not calmer, quieter. There is a difference. Calm is an absence of tension. Quiet in that place was something else. It was the specific silence of people who are listening. I had worked D block for 6 of my 15 years. I knew every cell, every inmate, every sound that building made when it settled in the cold. I knew what normal felt like in there. I want to tell you about an inmate named Warren before I tell you about the night everything changed. Warren had been at Harwick for 11 years when I first encountered him on D block. He was a quiet man, not withdrawn. He participated in programs. He had no disciplinary record to speak of. He was by any institutional measure a model inmate. But there was something about him that the officers who worked his corridor noticed and discussed in the way we discussed things we couldn't explain. Carefully, quietly, and only among ourselves. Warren knew things, not dramatic things. Not the kind of knowing that makes a story sound supernatural when you retell it. Small things, specific things. He would ask after a family member of an officer before that officer had mentioned anything at home being wrong. He would say something was coming before something came. A lockdown, a fight in another block, a transfer. Always quiet about it, never making a show of it. Just a word here, a question there, delivered in a tone so mild you could almost convince yourself it was coincidence. I had convinced myself it was coincidence for 6 years. 3 weeks before the night I am going to tell you about, Warren said something to me that I did not fully understand until later. I was doing evening rounds. He was sitting on the edge of his bunk the way he always sat, very still, very straight, like a man who has made a decision to take up as little space as possible. I passed his cell and he said my name, just my name. I stopped. He said, "Something is going to come back to this block." I asked him what he meant. He said, "Something that was here before the building, before any of this. It comes back sometimes." He paused, then he said, "When it does, don't go to the end of the corridor alone." I asked him what he was talking about. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "You already know what I'm talking about. You felt it. Everyone who works this block long enough feels it." I didn't answer that. I finished my rounds. I wrote nothing in my log because there was nothing official to write. I went home, and I sat with what he said, and I did what I had trained myself to do for 15 years. I set it aside and I went to work the next day. 3 weeks later, Thursday night in February, 11:47 in the evening. My partner for the shift was an officer named Davis. 6 years on the job, 2 of them on D block. Steady, reliable, not prone to dramatics. We had worked together enough times that we didn't need to talk much. We had a rhythm, a way of moving through the facility that came from knowing each other's pace. The first hour of the shift was normal. Rounds, count, paperwork. D block was quiet in its usual way. The lighting in the east corridor was doing its flickering thing. 2 of the overhead strips had been cycling on and off for weeks. Maintenance ticket open, not yet addressed. We had learned to work around it. At 11:47, an alarm came in from the east end of D block, cell D19. That was not unusual. Cell alarms triggered for a range of reasons: medical, altercation, equipment malfunction. Davis and I moved to respond the way we always moved. Professional. No urgency beyond what the situation called for. We were halfway down the east corridor when Davis stopped. I went 2 steps further before I realized he had stopped. I turned back. He was standing still in the middle of the corridor, looking toward the far end. The flickering strips were going on, off, on, off. And in the stuttering light, I could see that his face had changed. Something had left it. The professional composure, the practiced calm. Whatever was on his face now was something underneath all of that. I asked him what was wrong. He didn't answer immediately. He was still looking at the far end of the corridor. Then he said very quietly, "Do you see that?" I looked. The east corridor of D block ended at a solid wall. No door, no window. Just the end of the original 1962 construction. Poured concrete, painted over so many times the surface was uneven. A bulletin board with outdated notices pinned to it. Someone was standing at the end of that corridor. I want to be precise about this. I want to be as precise as I am capable of being, because precision is what I have left when everything else about that night resists explanation. The figure was standing with its back to us, facing the end wall. It was the size and rough shape of a person. It was not wearing the uniform of any officer or the clothing of any inmate. It was not wearing anything I could identify as clothing at all. In the stuttering light of the failing overhead strips, the details were difficult. Everything at that distance was difficult, but the shape was there, and it was standing in a place that required passing through a locked gate to reach. Davis said, "Who is that?" I reached for my radio. The figure turned around. I have tried many times to describe what I saw when it turned. Every time I try, I run into the same wall. The words exist for the individual components, but not for the combination. I can say the face was wrong. I can say the proportions were wrong. I can say that whatever intelligence was looking at us from the end of that corridor was not the kind of intelligence that belongs inside a human facility at 11:47 on a Thursday night. What I can say with absolute certainty is this: it knew we were there. It had known before it turned. The turning was not a reaction, it was a presentation. Davis made a sound I had never heard from him before, and have not heard from anyone since. Not a word, not a shout. Something lower than that. Something that came from a part of a person that training doesn't reach. I called it in. I told Control we had an unauthorized individual in D Block East Corridor, and I needed backup, and I kept my eyes on that figure while I talked, and it did not move, and it did not stop looking at us. Then the lights went out. Not the flickering, all of them. The entire East Corridor went dark in a way that was different from a power failure. A power failure has a quality of accident to it. This was complete, immediate, like a decision. I had my flashlight. I turned it on. I swept the beam to the end of the corridor. Empty, the wall, the bulletin board, the outdated notices, nothing else. Backup arrived 4 minutes later. 6 officers, the shift supervisor, a lieutenant. They walked the entire East Corridor. They checked every cell. They checked the gate that should have prevented anyone from reaching that end of the hall. Locked, secure, no sign of tampering, They found nothing. The cell alarm from D19, the one that had sent us down that corridor in the first place, was logged as a malfunction. The inmate in D19 said he had not triggered it. He said he had been asleep. I wrote my incident report. I wrote it carefully and completely, and I described an unauthorized individual in the corridor. I did not write what it looked like when it turned around. There was no box for that. Davis took 3 days of personal leave starting the following morning. When he came back, we never discussed what we had seen. Not once. In the months between that night and the day I put in my resignation, we worked together many times and neither of us ever said the name of what we saw at the end of that corridor. Some things you don't say out loud because saying them out loud makes them more real, and you are not ready for them to be more real. I went to Warren the morning after. First thing, I stood at his cell door, and I looked at him, and he looked at me, and he didn't say anything. He just waited. I said, "You knew." He said, "I told you not to go to the end of the corridor alone." I said, "What was it?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I don't know what it is. I know it's been here longer than this building, longer than anything built on this ground. I know it comes back sometimes, and when it does, the people who see it don't stay here long." He paused. Then he said, "You won't either." I asked him how he knew about it, how he had known it was coming. He said, "Some people can feel it before it arrives, like pressure dropping before a storm. I've been feeling it my whole life, in here, in other places before here. It follows certain kinds of ground." I asked him what that meant. He said, "Some land holds things that were here before us and will be here after. They don't mean anything by it. They're not here for us specifically. We just happen to be on the ground they come back to." I stood at that cell door for a long time after he stopped talking. Then I walked back to the security office and I sat down and I thought about 15 years, about the cold in that building that no heating reached, about the specific silence of inmates who were not calm but were listening, about the 6 years I had spent on D Block feeling something I had trained myself not to name. I thought about the look on Davis's face in the stuttering light. I thought about the way it had turned around. Not reacting, presenting. I put in my resignation 4 months later. I told them it was burnout. They believed me, or they chose to, and we shook hands and I walked out of Harwick Correctional Institute for the last time on a Tuesday morning in June, and I have not been back. I looked into the history of that ground after I left. It took time. The records were old and scattered, and some of them had clearly been organized by someone who did not want a clear picture to emerge. But what I found eventually was this. The land Harwick Correctional was built on had held a structure before the prison, before the town, before most of what was around it. A work facility of some kind in the early part of the last century that had operated briefly and been closed following deaths that the records described as unexplained. Before that, the ground had been avoided by the people who had lived in that region before American settlement. The historical records were incomplete on the specifics, but the word that appeared in multiple early accounts, in different languages, translated to roughly the same thing each time. Returning ground. Ground that things come back to. I have thought about Warren many times since I left, about what it means that a man who can feel that pressure, who has felt it his whole life, ended up on that ground in a cell on D Block. Whether that was coincidence, whether anything about it was coincidence, I have not gone back to find out. I will not go back. What I know is this: 15 years in corrections teaches you to read a room, to read a person, to read the particular quality of a situation before it fully declares itself. It teaches you the difference between danger that has a source and danger that doesn't. The first kind you can address, you can respond to it, contain it, file a report on it. The second kind you can only recognize. And then you can choose whether to stay on that ground or get off it. I got off it. Davis transferred to a facility in another county 8 months after that night. I heard this through someone we both knew. I heard he doesn't talk about Harwick. I heard he sleeps with the lights on now. I don't blame him. I do the same thing. Some nights, in the hour before I fall asleep, I think about the end of that corridor, the bulletin board, the outdated notices, the solid wall of 1962 construction that nothing should have been standing in front of. I think about the moment before it turned around, the stillness of it, the certainty, and I think about what Warren said. It's not here for us specifically. I have spent 4 years trying to find comfort in that. I have not found it yet, but I keep the lights on, and I don't walk to the end of any corridor alone.